Hello everyone and welcome to SCW Eurodrive's How-To series. We're going to be discussing how to maintain and take care of your product. So let's get into it. In today's episode of How-To, we're going to be discussing the changing of a conduit box location for the cable entry of your incoming power. Before we get into the actual steps, I'd like to share a few reminders. One, make sure that you've de-energized all power that's going to your equipment and the SCW motor. Make sure also that you've used your lockout tagout procedures so that everyone stays safe. In addition, you want to make sure that you have your PPE so that you keep yourself safe from injury or harm. Before we get started with moving components, I'd like to talk about why it's necessary to move cable entries. At times, you may have a motor that's designed, as this one is, for the cable entry in your incoming power to come into the bottom. We designate this as the X position on SCW Eurodrive motors. But you need to put the power, say, onto the end, and this would be position 3. To better understand how you position the cable entry, you're always going to start with X being the normal position. And here you can see X is located at the bottom. 1 is going to be located here closest to your output of your motor. 2 is always going to be the opposite of X, and these can rotate based on certain parameters. But then 3 is always going to be closest to your fan. In this particular situation, we're going to demonstrate how to move from cable entry X over here to cable entry 3. To get started, we're going to remove the cover. Now, SCW Eurodrive uses metric fasteners and components, so it's important that you use the proper nut driver that is a metric design. There's different fasteners of different sizes, and so it's important that you reference our technical specifications and operating instructions to know exactly what tool you need for what component. Simply just rotate counterclockwise to remove the bolts. You may choose to use an electric drill in order to expedite this process. For demonstration purposes, we are using a nut driver T-handle. I will recommend that you do not use an impact driver of any sort because you can damage components. Once you've removed this, we can go ahead and set it over here to the side. And now we have to remove these 4 Torx bits in order to get the conduit box to come free from the motor itself. So to do that, we're going to use our Torx T-handle. Because you're dealing with a little bit of a space or a cavity here with this motor, I recommend taking each piece out individually and then placing it somewhere where you won't lose it. So I've got one screw out. I'm going to go ahead and move it over there before I proceed to the next one. Now that I've removed the screws, it's time for us to take the conduit box off. It's important to remember and keep in mind where you want to put the conduit box when we reinstall it. Now, with our conduit boxes, we use a gasket to seal between the conduit box and the motor itself. We recommend, highly recommend, that you replace it with a new gasket. However, if you can't, inspect it to make sure that it has no damage to it before reusing. In this case, we're going to use a new gasket. Now, as you can see here, you have wires that are going into the terminal block. It's important that you inspect these wires to make sure that there's no damage, and you also want to make sure these wires are clear and free of this part of the motor so that when you put the conduit box back on, you're not going to have any chance of crimping or damaging the wires. So to get started, I'm going to take my conduit box again, and I've got my gasket. I'm going to place my gasket down onto the motor. And then remember, we said we're going to change from X to 3. So I'm just turning my conduit box to 3, and I'm going to place it down onto the motor. And then it's time to put the screws back in. I like to give it one more look, and you can see here the wires are free and clear of the components before I begin to tighten the fasteners. As I start to tighten the fasteners, it's important to make sure that the gasket is aligned properly and also that you follow the pattern of going across from each other. We call this diametrically opposed. You want to do a little bit of tightening with each one before you get down to the final tightening sequence. We've installed the conduit box. There's a couple of things that we need to go through before we put our cover back onto the motor. First and foremost, understand that we are demonstrating how to do this. So you in the field or in your factory are going to be applying the incoming power to this motor. Before you begin to do that, it's so important that you make sure that your power is de-energized and that you have all the lockout tagout in place before reapplying your wires to the motor. It's also important to know where to put those wires back. You have instructions that you can follow that SEW Eurodrive provides when it comes to wiring your motors properly, and we ask that you please follow those in full manner. In addition to making sure that you have everything de-energized and that you've wired everything properly, it's important that you do another visual inspection to make sure that your gasket is aligned properly and that also you don't have any wires that are crimped or damaged in this motor. Now we're ready to put the cover back on. So you'll notice the cover is rotated. It has to rotate with the cable entry. This cover looks like it's square, but it's not symmetrical. Make sure that the SEW Eurodrive logo, here it's just SEW, is going to be oriented so that the cable entry is at the bottom of the logo, as you can see here. Now we're going to tighten the 4 bolts in an opposed sequence. And now we are ready to put this motor back into operation. Again, it's important to do a final inspection. Just make sure nothing's sticking out, nothing's crimped, everything's fastened properly, and you're ready to roll. If you're interested in learning more about SEW Eurodrive's components, products, or solutions, please go to seweurodrive.com. Together, we drive the world.